Welcome to our weekly discussion, Moral Side of the News. I'm Shawn Kaelin with the WHAS Crusade for Children. As always, I'm joined today by a distinguished panel. Reverend David Harkleroad, South Point Church. Rabbi Emerita Gaylia R. Rooks, The Temple. Father John Stoltz, St. Aloysius Catholic Church. Reverend Clay Calloway, West Louisville Ministers Coalition. And Reverend Harriett Akins-Banman, New Albany, Centenary, United Methodist Church. Several tornadoes touched down in Kentucky and southern Indiana on Tuesday, and Wednesday marked the 50th anniversary of the super outbreak of 1974.
National Weather Service has officially confirmed 5 tornadoes touched down in Kentuckiana, 1 in Nelson, Anderson, and Jessamine counties in Kentucky. The NWS also confirmed 1 tornado in Corydon, Indiana. The service just officially confirmed tornadoes in the 2 areas with the most damage, Prospect, Kentucky, and Jeffersonville, Indiana. An EF1 damage of at least 105 miles per hour has been determined happened in Prospect, and an EF1 tornado of 100 miles per hour was potentially seen in Jeffersonville. The survey is ongoing, so we'll have more coming up on that. Right now, officials are working on the cleanup efforts after last night's storms. Anchorage Middletown Fire Department says during searches last night, they touched 1,033 structures, and 38 of those structures had minor damage, but 37 had major damage, and 5 structures were destroyed. Out of 100 residents they helped, 22 people had minor injuries that did not require medical treatment. An EF1 tornado touched down in Nelson County, northeast of Chaplin. A family of 6 was in this building you see right here when the storms moved through. Cheryl Fahey says her daughter, another adult, and 4 children were in that home when the tornado hit. Amazingly, no one was hurt. While half of the building is now gone, the place where the family took shelter is still standing.
It wasn't until the Brandenburg tornado hit that I think we all realized, hey, we are in for some trouble here.
The building we were in was destroyed, and everything around us here was destroyed.
It always happened someplace else, and tonight it happened in Louisville.
Everything was spinning. You could hear everything in the house ripping and tearing and being pulverized.
That is a tornado.
We don't hardly go anywhere that April 3rd isn't a vivid memory.
That tornado was part of the April 3rd, 1974 super outbreak that impacted 13 different states, the second largest tornado outbreak in U.S. history.
So panel, your thoughts on the Tuesday tornadoes and your memories, recollections of the 1974 tornado.
I happened to, I was in the midst of the tornado. I was out shopping in Middletown at a store out there, and they said a tornado was coming. They identified one that touched down in Prospect. So they advised everybody to go into the shelter in place area. So I was quite fortunate to be someplace where you could shelter in place, because I was not aware that a tornado was even coming, a tornado warning was even sounded. So I was very fortunate in that respect by being somewhere where I was notified and was able to stay sheltered in place. I remember in 1974 vividly. I was in college at the time in Frankfurt, and I was so young, you know, in college. I was 21, 22, something like that. I was in my apartment with a friend of mine. It was just a heavy rainstorm. We didn't know it was a tornado till the next day. So sometimes ignorance is bliss. Had I known it was a tornado, I probably would have, you know, had a different emotional, psychological reaction. But I do remember that day vividly in '74 when it hit in Louisville and Frankfurt. But I wasn't aware of the extent of the devastation in Louisville. Of course, it made national news, as this one did. This made national news. Prospect was the lead story on Good Morning America. So, it's just quite fortunate those that survived. It's unfortunate for those that were affected by it, disproportionate. But by God's grace, it could have always been worse. And we sometimes are made aware that there is a greater power than man at work and moving in our midst. And sometimes we need to be, and we are reminded of that when storms of this nature. They call them acts of God in the insurance industry, and they call them that for a reason. So, in the midst of great tragedy, there was some grace displayed, I think.
I was in 3rd or 4th grade at the time of the 1974 tornadoes, and my memory's a little bit fuzzy from but I do recall the day. One of the things I noticed between the time then and then to the time now where we had tornadoes just a few days ago is that we still, of course, cannot control the weather, but our response maybe I think is better. The sense of science around predicting, in some ways, the behavior of tornadoes when the atmosphere is right, I think, and when I think we get a bigger notice of that. Of course, with greater communication too, we have greater avenues of communication. So I think we have the sense now of having a response that we could be safer than what we were years ago. At the same time, without being able to control and that sometimes, many times in these occasions, it can still be really tragic.
We were sheltering downstairs, and my daughter called from New York, said, please tell me that you're somewhere safe. And I'm like, we didn't even ask her how she found out, but it certainly did make national news. I was not here yet in 1974. I was still in college. But I remember someone brought a book that they had made with photos and newspaper clippings and showed me all about it. And there was a check. And I said, why do you have this check in the book? And she said, look at the envelope it came in. It was from somewhere near Cincinnati. And it had blown all the way to Cincinnati. Wow. And the people, because their address was at the top of the check, sent it back. Unbelievable. So I've always been, we didn't have tornadoes on the East Coast. We had hurricanes, but somehow that wasn't as frightening to me. So, yeah, I always, grew up on The Wizard of Oz, and so to me, tornadoes are plenty scary.
Yeah, I also was not here in 1974, but because I was about 9 years not here yet at all. But I
Don't rub it in.
Sorry. I live near the Xenia, Ohio area where one of the major tornadoes went through. So that was sort of legend growing up, was the 74 tornado. But in regards to this recent one, thank God, as you said, it wasn't worse. It could have been far more devastation. But as I've been thinking about this, it really reminded me, Christian theology has this category of natural evil that explains not moral evils, but these kind of things, the kind of tragedies that happen. And I just personally find them very satisfying answers to the broken things that happen in the world. These are not just merely random acts. There's things that happen, yes, scientifically, naturally, but we understand, I think, some theological depth behind it. And I find it very, very helpful in thinking through these issues.
I remember April 3rd, 1974, probably more vividly than I'd like to. I rushed home from school. I was 13. I was at home by myself and knew something was happening. Turned on the radio or the television, don't remember that, but was told something, it's coming. And the only thing I could think to do was to grab my cat and a blanket and go to the basement, and then wait in the basement until one of my parents eventually came home, because they were at work and they were safe, but they couldn't contact me by phone.
Yeah,
the lines were down or whatever.
In those days.
Right. So it was frightening. So I think, and then we lived in Kansas, and my husband and I lived in Kansas in our early years of marriage, and I had this very healthy respect for all things tornado. But the other piece of it is just this wonderment at nature, and it brought to mind Psalm 8. We look at the stars in the skies, and who but you but made them, or however that verse goes. And I'm sorry I can't give it verbatim, but just the wonderment of nature and all of its possibilities. And it certainly reminds me of how finite we are and how wondrous creation is.
And how little control we have. I mean, we can predict. We were better at predicting.
Yeah.
Warning signals. We've improved in that regard. We can't stop them though.
Right.
So when it decides to come, it's going to come. And of course, you think about theological in the Bible. Of course, Matthew 8, it says, what kind of man, referring to Jesus, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey, suggesting that there's a divine power that is behind all of it, and he's the one and only one that can control it or stop it. So, and he helps to put it in perspective. That helps to some great degree, that that God ultimately is in control. That is comforting to a great degree, but it's beyond man's control. And sometimes we need to be reminded that we have some perfect political storms that we're in the midst of. It seems perpetually, but even all of that is just a blowhard compared to the winds that blow at great devastation in the natural world. So, but it's just a great reminder that there's a greater power than what we have as men and women.
It also gives us the opportunity to show the respect we have for one another and for life, because even our differences dissipate when we're all affected by the same storm, and then we gather together to make sure the neighbor is okay and those across the state are okay, and there is beauty in that we can show. Once again, we can come together and honor one another and
Except
help
for
each
those who
other.
are unhoused, who don't have a safe place to go, and maybe don't even have cell phones to, be aware of what's coming down the pike. And so I think that it certainly highlights, as you said, our fragility, and in the blink of an eye.
Well, and many you mentioned that they experience tornadoes frequently. If all they have is a cardboard house in a hut somewhere, I mean, just a slightest wind can disrupt their lives. So putting that in perspective and realizing that those who do not have homes don't have a home to lose in the first place. So it's just a way to put things
But
in
are
perspective.
exposed to elements that we, with our air conditioning and central heat and all the rest of that,
I never forget one time, years ago, I got to say this, it was an electrical storm years ago, and my neighbor, he was always outside chopping wood. And his name was Luther, and I said, Luther, did your power go out? He said, I don't use power, I use coal oil. So the storm didn't affect him because he was just a natural Amish kind of guy. He lived in a very natural way, so the power outage had no effect on him whatsoever.
Did he invite you over?
No, not but it was a strange acknowledgement that I was a young man then, right out of college, but it just dawned on me that many people live off the grid.
Yeah.
And so it affects different people in different ways.
Gaylia, I'd like to return to your comment about our homeless, our houseless siblings, that this kind of storm reminds us of the work we're yet to do and the work that we're involved in, but yet it's so monumental that this kind of disaster points us.
And as we say, thank God it was not like it was in '74 where hundreds of people died. What's the best way to thank God? In my opinion, it's to go out and help people who didn't have a safe place to shelter, or make a difference. Don't just say the words, but walk the walk. Don't just talk the talk.
Sure.
Very good. Great discussion. Thanks for watching and listening to Moral Side this week. On to topic 2, a topic I'm sure that is dear to the hearts of our clergy and panelists. As we celebrate the Easter season and Passover in a couple of weeks, a new Gallup poll suggests only 30% of U.S. adults regularly attend weekly religious services. That's down 12% from 2003, when that number was 42%, and then down to 38% from 2013. Broken down a little bit more to the clergy we have representing us today, Protestant Christian was down 4% over that time, Catholic was down 12%, and Judaism was up, Gaylia, 7%. So panel, I turn it to you. What's happening?
I mean, there's trends, different trends. You got to recognize trends going on. Well, for many, COVID was a real revelation, and a cause for attendance devastation in many respects. People just couldn't attend. So, and people are just now starting to come back out. At our church this year, we've had some high water days like Women's Day. We just had Easter last week. Attendance, from the largest attendance we've had in the last 3 or 4 years. And people are coming out. I liken it unto the Munchkins in the Wizard of Oz when the Wicked Witch was dead. They finally saw it was safe to come back out again. People are doing that in terms of the attendance at our church and actually physically attending. Now we've had online attendance. Our online ministry has really strengthened. So our church's reach has become much stronger because of the adjustments that was made through COVID. So even though the physical church looked different and the physical presence was different, but the presence online was much stronger than it has ever been and continues to this day. But the social reality changes things and makes people adjust in ways that you may not have before. There's a generation now that just don't have the relationship to the traditions. You have younger people in their 20s and 30s that just out of the habit of going to church, just are churchless. I mean, houseless, they're just churchless. They just have no connection whatsoever. So they have so many other things filling their lives up.
I think COVID did accelerate things, but I certainly think, anthropologists would say we're in a post-Christian culture now in the United States of America. And really, I think a big part of it is the previous cultural Christianity. I think that there was a lot of mediocre, sort of just very laid-back Christianity that was not passionate, that was not genuine. And I think it raised a generation of people who really just did not have interest in the church, did not have interest in Christianity. Now, it's obviously not everyone across the board, but I think that there was sort of a mainstreaming of Christianity that has led to this decline in faith, at least in Christian circles.
I know that there's a rise also in agnosticism, in atheism too. I think some statistics are showing that too. And so that, to me, speaks to the sense of individual belief, a person's own sense of spirit and sense of belief in God. That is the behavioral practices of praying every day, of attempting to live a moral life in accord with the religious tradition that they're a part of. I separate that experience, though, that individual belief, to what this study is showing, and that's around corporate belief, corporate participation in worship. Joining together, say, on a specific day, Sabbath, Sunday, on those days to worship together as a people, which is a different kind of prayer and calls for different kind of behavior. And there's a loss there. And I'm wondering what the cause of that loss is. There may be studies do point to that. I would be interested in seeing that. Perhaps if I took guesses, one would be a rise of individualism, and perhaps that we've seen pre-COVID a loss of participating in communal actions, in corporate participation, and other kinds of clubs and other things like that. I think it's really important and necessary, though, I think from a theological point of view, to participate with other people and to pray with other people. That's a good thing to do. The other thing around that is some things I've heard is that it's actually good for us to participate in community, to be with other people, and not just to be in isolation. And so there's a necessity there for being in corporate worship that I think is important. So I sadly see the decline. I would like to see the reverse. And probably I'm thinking I would agree with David here that part of the solution is going to have to come from within the church itself, in terms of the way that we behave, our own positions, and the work that we do to invite people back in and to have a passion and vigor about belonging to a faith community.
I think at times we've hurt ourselves as the institutional church as well. In conversation with young adults, the response I've gotten has been, for what reason do I need to come to your building or to gather with your people? I know my belief system.
Your building and your people is the catchword there.
Right. And it's also your church.
Right.
And these are the sins that you've done. And yeah, you're right. We are a church, a denomination, a people of faith that continue to sin and sin well. And sometimes we really mess up. And when leadership really messes up and that makes the headlines, then it becomes, for what reason would I want to be part of that? So I think it's for us within the church, within this community of faith, whatever that might be, whatever flavor that might be, that we be as transparent as possible. And yeah, we're going to make mistakes. However, we believe in a God of forgiveness and second chance and acceptance. And yeah, you can go to your clubs and be involved in community goodness, but will you get that same message in the same way?
There's a line in the Passover Seder, it's a section called the Four Children, traditionally called the Four Sons, and it says, the wicked son asks, is the wise child, the wicked child, the simple child, and the one who is too young to ask. And the wicked child asks, what is the meaning of all this to you? And the rabbis say that by saying to you, like you said, your church and your people, they've excluded themselves from the community. And that's, you know, according to the tradition, that's wrong. And that's, interestingly, modern psychology has proven that people who are members of a religious organization have, you know, better health, better brain function, better, more resiliency, more, I'm missing the word here that I'm looking for, but anyway, and speaking of Passover, which I just was, and you mentioned it was just Easter and now it's going to be Passover, I always wonder about these studies because 90%, more than 90% of all the Jews in the world will be attending a Passover Seder. More than 90%. It's just staggering to me. It's only a little more than 50% who go on the high holy days, you know, the Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, and Judaism is such a home-based religion. You know, Friday night in our congregation is a big deal, but we've seen the numbers dropping off more and more over the years. But that doesn't mean that people aren't observing in whatever way they choose the Sabbath from Friday night sunset to Saturday night sunset. Some people may go on Saturday morning, some people may go on Friday night, some people may not go at all, but they may be lighting candles at home or doing something special to honor the Sabbath. And so there are certain things that can't be done just at home in your family, and certainly there's the communal sense. There are even prayers that you can't say unless you have a quorum of 10 people. Did you say men?
No, I said community.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I thought you said, I said 10, I thought you said
No,
men. No.
It rhymes with men, that's all.
Sorry, 10 people. Well, if you're Orthodox, then yeah, that would be 10 men. But in liberal circles, you know, we would do that anyway. But there's tremendous strength in community. You know, when traditionally just the mourners rise for the mourners' prayer toward the end of the service. In Reform Judaism, everyone rises. The mourners should not stand alone. And of course, with close to 7 million Jews being wiped out in the Holocaust, murdered, all those generations are gone and there's no one left to say the Kaddish prayer, the prayer for the dead, for them. And so we have taken on that responsibility. And traditionally, you would not say that prayer if you weren't in a minyan, a quorum of 10 people. But, you know, liberal Jews, Reform Jews, we would do it anyway. But there's still that there's something very special. Singing, and, you know, I think we all became even more aware of that. Our congregation was great during COVID and getting everything online and all the rest of that. But it's not the same when you're not all singing with one voice and praying together and seeing each other at the social hour afterwards or whatever.
You mentioned sing one voice. This has been called the Negro National Anthem, but lift every voice. The first line is lift every voice and sing. So it's a communal, and same way in the church, it's the community. And in the Old Testament, most of the prayers, the communication has been communal. Most of the commands was to community. I mean, on and on and on, even in the New Testament, where it's a sense of community, it's a communal, not me, it's we, you know. So when we overlook the we-ness of it all, you miss the power of God at work. The way he intended to work was to work in community. And when you have this great division that's taking place in our nation, I think it's a weird reality, but it is what it is. And the version of Christianity that's being promoted oftentimes has been so twisted and perverted into a form of nationalism. So you don't have the power of God and Christ moving it. It's a man-made derivative that has lost its power. It'll fizzle out like anything else. So when you get away from the essence of what God has commanded in the Old Testament, the essence of what God's commanded through Christ in the New Testament, then you into some man-made philosophy that will fizzle out in any way it is. And this new generation, they're pretty good at vetting some things. I mean, I tell you, they will expose hypocrisy they'll Google you, they'll see what you do. They don't always believe what you say, but they watch what you do, okay? And oftentimes they can't believe what you say because they see what you do. And so you can see this movement, this nationalism that's rising in the country, that has exposed a lot of hypocrisy and contradictions that otherwise would have been concealed. So I think there's a lot of reasons. And it always is an opportunity to get back to the real thing, the original. The best way to identify a counterfeit dollar bill is not to study all the counterfeits, but study the original. And there's no due north. If you have even one due north, so if you get away from that, those absolutes, then everything else will get misdirected anyway.
I noticed that in that list that the Catholic Church has had the largest drop of participation in all of the churches and denominations, synagogues mentioned there, religions. And, the sins of the hierarchy of the church and of its movements, its administration have been very apparent in these past 20 years. And there's no doubt, I think, in that group who've left, some of them have left just really out of personal scandal against the church, and it's hard to come to the faith. So I think part of the work within our church, especially, is a work of repentance that we need to do, and which is good, I think, for the church, good for everyone to do that work. And I think it's going to be, in that sense, long, slow work of heartfelt work that has to be done to make things right.
But again, that is to the heart of genuine Christianity, sincere repentance. People see, oh, there's something different here. There's admission of guilt. There's embracing these Christian virtues. And, I think, Clay, you said it better than I did what I was trying to say. A Christianity that lacks godliness, that lacks the power of Christ, detrimental to the church.
There's no substitute.
Thank you very much. Another great discussion for this week's Moral Side of the News. Thanks for watching and listening, and thanks to our panel this week. Reverend David Harkleroad, South Point Church. Rabbi Emerita Gaylia R. Rooks, the Temple. Father John Stoltz, St. Aloysius Catholic Church. Reverend Clay Calloway, West Louisville Ministers Coalition. And Reverend Harriett Akins-Banman, New Albany Centenary United Methodist Church. Thanks for watching and listening to Moral Side of the News. We'll have an all-new discussion next week. Have a great week. Have a good solar eclipse tomorrow.